Welcome, everyone. Come on in. Hope you find a good seat. We'll be starting the webinar in just a moment with Richard Halsey, the Environmental Experts webinar series. How's that look, John? You're muted.
It's showing us two screens like it has in the past.
How did we get out of that?
Something to do with your main monitor. Because I know you have two monitors.
I guess I'll just bring it over here. This will do it.
There you go. Solid.
Got to remember to put it in the middle monitor. So welcome, everyone. We'll be starting here in just a minute or two. Okay, I guess I'll go through our introduction here, and welcome to the Channel Islands Restoration Environmental Experts webinar series. Talk a little bit about what CIR is. We're a 501c3 nonprofit organization. We do habitat restoration contracting, environmental consulting, and environmental education, among other things. Tonight, we're going to be hearing about discovering ourselves through nature, the webinar, and it'll be with Richard Halsey. Besides being the director of the California Chaparral Institute, yay, an education/scientific nonprofit dedicated to providing a voice for the chaparral, Richard W. Halsey is also a writer, photographer, and most importantly, a teacher who strives to unleash our innate creativity as inspired by nature. Halsey has given more than 500 presentations and has written numerous books, research papers, and articles over the past 20 years concerning chaparral ecology and the importance of reestablishing our connection with nature. Richard has also worked with the San Diego Museum of Natural History and continues to teach natural history throughout the state. He founded and has been teaching the Chaparral Naturalist Certification Program for the past 10 years. The second edition of his book, Fire, Chaparral, and Survival in Southern California, was awarded the Best Nonfiction Local Interest Book by the San Diego Book Awards Association. Richard earned undergraduate degrees from the University of California in environmental studies and anthropology, and a graduate degree in secondary education. Richard taught biology, physics, and environmental science for over 30 years in both public and private high schools, was honored as the Teacher of the Year for San Diego City Schools, and was awarded the Krista McAuliffe Fellowship. He has also been trained as a wildlife firefighter. Very cool. We're really glad to have him with us. As we go through the webinar, we'd love to have your questions. Please enter them in the Q&A section of the Zoom window, and we will read them off to Richard. If you would like to see any of our other webinars, and of course, people who's missed this webinar can catch them all at our website, cirweb.org/webinars. There's a treasure trove of great webinars on there from the last few years. Real neat stuff. Doesn't get old. Go back and check out some of our past webinars. CIR wishes to acknowledge that the land upon which our restoration work is completed is the unceded territory of the Chumash people. We pay our respects to the Chumash elders, past, present, and future, for they hold the memories, traditions, and culture of this land we work to protect. And with that, I will stop sharing and we'll turn it over to Richard Halsey. Go for it, Rick. You're muted, by the way.
Thank you. It's really a pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me. And I'd like to thank everybody for sharing your time with me. We're all mortals. We have a limited amount of time on this planet. And I'm not just saying this is an interesting introduction. I want you to think about that for a moment, because we have a lot of choices in life, and you want to make the ones that are going to bring you the greatest joy. So hopefully I'll bring some of that into your life tonight. And thank you again for sharing your life with me. The question I want to ask you essentially is, what is nature, and why is it so important? And I want you to think about that just for a second on your own. Why is nature important to you? So if we were together, I'd have you all share it with your neighbor, but can't do that, unfortunately. But we will talk about some of the things I've heard over the years when I asked this question. And essentially, nature is the one common denominator most people just don't argue about. It's embedded in our physiology and our genetics, and most people really love it. They find a lot of inspirational time there, makes them feel better. But the question is, why is that? Well, we evolved in nature over 3 million years. We've only been doing this civilized indoor thing for about 10,000 years, and not many of us. In fact, it hasn't been until the last 100 years that we've actually been in cities larger than 3,000 people. So we're still out on the savannah. We still respond that way in our own hearts and minds. And I'll give you an example. This is kind of a date tip for those of you who are still looking for someone. When you go on your first date, you really ought to go find a place where there's going to be a fire. So why is that? Well, when you're on a campfire and things get awkward, what do? You stare at the fire, right? And it makes you feel good. And we're incredibly attracted to fire. And why is that? Well, because it gives us an evolutionary advantage that is phenomenal. And those of us who really didn't like fire aren't in the gene pool anymore. So that's a connection. It's called an atavistic behavior, which harkens back to your past. Another one is your dogs. If you're a dog person, cat people, this works for too. But when you're with your dog, why does it feel so good? Again, connecting with another species has been part of our evolutionary journey, and those of us who couldn't do it aren't around anymore. And so when you're with your dog by the campfire, you're getting about as reconnected with your ancestral past as you can possibly be. So again, nature is a common denominator most people can talk about without any kind of angst or argument in their heart. And that's kind of a hard thing to find these days. So that's why nature is so powerful and important for us. And just to touch on the physiological issues, you go out in nature and what happens? Your heart rate goes down, your blood pressure goes down, your killer T cell count, which is your immune system, goes up. Cortisol, which is a stress hormone coming out of your adrenals on the back of your kidneys, it goes down. And why is that? Because if you're in a room right now or an office, you're probably not recognizing the air conditioner or the fluorescent lights or whatever. Your body is, though, you see. And when those things are constantly going on, your cortisol levels are going up. So you're on a constant state of pressure all the time, even though consciously you're ignoring it, your body isn't. And try a little experiment someday. Turn off the fluorescent lights or the heater or whatever it is that's making the noise, and just listen to the calm. It's pretty an amazing thing. So wind, bird, sounds, rain, all of those things do wonderful, healthful responses to your body. So it's something to think about. And on that tone, nature is not a secret. we've been thinking about this since we started thinking in Western civilization anyway, about why we are who we are, where we come from. Plato talked about it. Many great thinkers. Epicurus, he had a garden outside of Athens that people wandered through and they relaxed. If you know about Friedrich Nietzsche, Carl Jung, all those guys, they took walks in the Alps. Jung had a little cabin by a lake. So people who have been thinking about deep things, they all end up going out in nature. And you probably have all experienced this yourself. So it's an essentially important thing. And I just want to highlight the fact that this right now is probably the best time to be alive as a human being, especially in Western cultures. Our lifespan has never been longer. We have access to things we've never had access to. We don't have to go to the store and fear about getting taken out by a grizzly bear or the next group of people. I mean, we're pretty fortunate. And unfortunately, that's not the way sometimes the public media likes to portray things, because they embellish a lot of catastrophizing, and which seems to get all the attention. You can't take your eyes off the train wreck, but you can choose to avoid that stuff. You don't have to let them manipulate your mind. And nature is the best place to go to escape that. So on that note, my particular love is chaparral. I want you to think about how you spell that for a minute, because if you forget anything, I don't want you to forget that. So it's 1P, 2 R's. So on to the chaparral we'll go here. And I'll show you some fun pictures. So when you go out in nature, the thing I want you to think about is not only its physiological dimension and mental dimension, but what's going on out there. Well, nature always surprises. And of course, my screen is sharing, but my PowerPoint isn't working. This is why I love PowerPoint so much. I'm going to get out of this and we'll try it again. Hang on a second. Yeah, so one of my tasks these days is trying to get away from technology as much as I can, because technology does take you out of your body, interrupts your space, and takes you away from where you are. And so I've been giving a lot of presentations without PowerPoints, and it's really wonderful. All right, we'll try this again. How's that? It works. So that's what I was trying to get at. Nature surprises. You cannot go out into nature without something surprising you. A new flower, a new little ant, a bird you haven't seen. That little fellow on the right-hand corner there is on no, excuse me, that's Catalina Island. It's further north than the Channel Islands. But that little plant there is chamise, which is typically a much larger plant. I've never seen one like that before, and I'm supposed to be the chaparral guru. So once again, I'm surprised about things I should know about. So whenever you go out into nature, there's always something new. The little fellow in the upper left-hand corner, that's Cooper. That's our chief spiritual officer for the Chaparral Institute. I always like to give him a plug. He just had his 17th birthday last month, so he's a very wise influence. So when you go out in nature, a couple of things you want to look at is things you don't really think about. This is a watershed map of North America. All the solid colors are one watershed. So all the pink, every raindrop that hits in that pink area ends up in the Mississippi Delta. But look at California. We'll enlarge that really quick. Look at southern central California. Look how many watersheds there are in our region. That's one of the reasons why Central and Southern California is the most biodiverse place in North America and rivals many places on the planet. Just because watersheds separate habitats, and separation is sort of the stuff of evolution. And then geology is another thing. People don't think about it because they're looking at the birds, they're looking at the plants. Look at the ground for a little bit. And the rocks on the ground tell wonderful stories. Some people get a little agitated with the different names that they have to memorize, but it's just like anything else. Just a little factoid here. A lot of people talk about, the granite in the Sierra Nevada. There is no granite in the Sierra Nevada. Once you understand geology, you find out, oh, most of it's granodiorite. And you're thinking, what's the matter? The closest granite in California is in Yuma, Arizona. So that whole idea surprises you and you want to find out more. This is why rocks are fun. And they don't move, so you can come up on them and study them. Here's some rocks on top of a hill. And what do those look like? They look like cobbles, right? Stream bed. This was a stream bed that was 300 miles southeast of San Diego when there was a giant river that's coming off of a big volcano mountain chain that was about 20,000 feet down in Baja, which wasn't Baja at the time, of course. But what's interesting is these rocks, take a look at this diagram, upper left-hand corner, 40 million years ago. That shows you the big delta, right? But then the tectonic plates move. Look what happens to it at 18 million years. And then it separates that WTRB. That's basically Los Angeles Basin. It turns around and sticks out that way. And look at the delta. It keeps moving up until finally the delta's in San Diego and the original mountains are down there in Sonora, Mexico. Look at the Channel Islands. They're right in between that chunk that moved into LA and San Diego. And then, of course, a little further north too. But there's those rocks that we find in San Diego, those cobbles from that delta on Santa Rosa Island too. So you find these things all over the place and you wonder, where are they? Another nature surprise, right? So what I want to get into really quickly is the three basic terrestrial ecosystems we're dealing with here. People like to think in threes, and this will give you the context of the chaparral ecosystem, which we're going to be talking about today. So everybody knows about forests, right? There's different forests. There's dense forests, which are quite natural, contrary to what you often hear in the news media. And there's not so dense forests up in the Sierra Nevada. There's grasslands. And in the Carrizo Plain, which is in the Central Coast, many of you have probably been there, especially during those super blooms they've had the last decade. Incredible colors. That's not Photoshop, by the way. So there's different grasslands. The question I'm asking here is, why do most people know about forests and grasslands? Just think about it for a second. Most people don't know about the other ecosystem we're going to talk about, and that's the shrublands. And why is that? Well, sometimes I can't understand things. I usually say, well, it has to do with money, probably. That's why people think the way they do. And sure enough, what comes out of forests? Timber. What comes out of grasslands? Forage for cattle. What happens in shrublands? They get in the way. Traditionally, we wanted to get rid of these things. We want to mitigate them, clear the brush. You hear this all the time, right? So the shrublands, and in California, it's characterized by chaparral primarily, is where most of the biodiversity in California is. So if you look at the map of California, you can see it's throughout the entire state. It's in every single county in the state. It ought to be the state ecosystem. In fact, we actually, this legislative session, got the big berry manzanita to be designated as the California state shrub, believe it or not. And it's sitting on the governor's desk right now to be signed. So we've been working on that one for 20 years. We finally got it this year. So take a look at the picture up in the upper right. That's the trail to Refugio Peak. And that's the Santa Barbara Channel there, right in the background. But what's the chaparral characterized by? Just think about it. If you had to describe it to somebody, what would you say? Think about it yourself just for a minute and I'll reveal the answer. There you go. Drought-hardy shrubs, I bet most of you got that. Mediterranean climate, which means hot, dry summers, mild, wet winters, and infrequent wildfire. You'll notice that's italicized. So there's a bunch of shrublands, chaparral shrublands throughout California, but unfortunately they're named improperly. So we're going to get rid of that because the name matters. So watch carefully. It took me a while to get this figured out on PowerPoint. See that? We're going to cross those off. So when you go up into the Los Padres National Forest, what are you looking for? You're looking for a forest. Well, there's not a lot of forest out there, especially behind Santa Barbara. There is some above the San Luis Obispo area, but for the most part, it's almost 100% chaparral. So we want to change the name from National Forest, which doesn't represent the name, to National Chaparral Preserves. Doesn't that make sense? So I have done some guerrilla activity out in the national forest, and we have big signs that cover these signs. And anyway, they upsets the Forest Service a little bit, but that's how you get the idea across. So the question here is, how come there's no trees out there? And it's pretty simple. Here's a graph of the rainfall in California, and you can see what goes on. And as you go up the coast, there's more and more rain, obviously. But what happens in the summer? It doesn't rain. And this is really weird because that's when it rains in most of the rest of the planet. And so you probably all know this, of course. Spring starts in Santa Barbara region and Southern California in October, November with the first rains, believe it or not. And then it goes all the way to May, and that's autumn. It lasts for about 2 or 3 weeks. And that's when you lose leaves from the ceanothus and some of the other shrubs out there. And then you have drought. So we have 3 seasons in Southern California, especially in North Central California. And so where do you find these magnificent shrubland ecosystems? There's 5 places on the planet. Some of you may have heard of these kinds of things before, but it's a good review. There's California, of course, central Chile, South Africa, the Mediterranean, which is named for, of course, and southwestern Australia, some of the most biodiverse places on Earth. And it does this because it produces the biodiversity because of this weird edge. Everything's on a knife edge, right? North and south slopes on mountains, totally different habitats. On north-facing slopes where there's not as much direct sunlight, you can get chaparral. And on south-facing slopes, you get less dense vegetation. If you go up that road, San Marcos Pass there's a lot of places where the hillsides facing the ocean, it's all ceanothus from the fires that have been up there, because they can handle the drought conditions much more than the stuff you see on the other side of the mountains overlooking the Solvang area and places like that. So are there seasons in the chaparral? Well, yeah, but here's what you learned in high school, even if you grew up in Santa Barbara. April showers bring Mayflowers. No, that's not the way it is. We're going to ditch that. I came up with one myself. You don't have to credit me at all. You can use this at parties. Winter rainy days bring February bouquets. Isn't that the way it is? So we're a special place in California, and if people can just get outdoors and start realizing what's out there, it's much more interesting. So before we jump into how chaparral is diverse, does anybody have any questions? John, Ken, you might want to look at the chats. Anybody have anything you want to ask really quickly?
So far, we've only had one question, and the person was wondering how to volunteer with the Chaparral Institute.
Oh.
Which Channel Islands.
Go to our website and send us an email. It's nature@californiachaparral.org. 1P, 2 R's. Don't forget. Okay, so how is chaparral diverse? Well, it's not all the same. Most people don't realize that. There's 12 main types that I've come up with. Depending on who you're talking to, there's much more, but I like to keep it simple. The first 6 I have there are all based on the dominant plant that you see in the systems. And the next 5 are sort of geographical. And the last one there is serpentine, which you may know is the California state rock. There's some serpentine up in the hills behind Lompoc and some of those little communities back there. It's that green rock, but it's all over San Luis Obispo. So anyways, different kinds. This is maritime chaparral, which you have obviously in Santa Barbara. The definition for maritime chaparral is if you're standing in it and you can see the ocean, it's maritime chaparral. This is serpentine chaparral, pretty toxic soils for plants. The chaparral species that love it are smaller, and the chaparral is the only system that can actually hang in there. There's other types here that I have on the list. This is ceanothus chaparral. This is redshank chaparral on the right, which is in Santa Monica Mountains. There's some between the San Luis Obispo and I think Santa Barbara County line. Upper left is chamise chaparral in bloom, and that's what it looks like in the summer. It's really got this beautiful auburn kind of look. And there's manzanita chaparral, named for the beautiful manzanita. That's why it's the state shrub almost now. This is Burton Mesa by Lompoc. And this is island chaparral on the Channel Islands. There's a Beautiful patch along the ridgeline there on Santa Rosa Island with some incredibly gorgeous chaparral plants and Torrey pines, which are squatter and shorter than the ones in San Diego County. Then there's what we call episodic chaparral, which happens after all high severity wildfires in forests. This comes back up. It's not an unusual thing. This is ceanothus coming up after the cedar fire in 2003 in San Diego County. And it comes up after big fires in the Sierra Nevada. Also, this is after the Rim Fire, if you're familiar with that one. And just to let you know, this has happened since the beginning of time. High severity, big forest fires have always happened. They will always happen. And what happens right afterwards? The chaparral comes up as the first successful community, providing shade for the conifers and helps the system come back to a forest. A lot of people don't like that. They go in there and they grind up the chaparral, plant new trees, of which most of them die because there's nothing to shade them. But humans have a funny way of doing those kinds of things. All right, so territorial animals, a lot of those. This is the wren tit. It's got a beautiful little call. It's the first bird you hear in the morning. The last one you hear at night. Kind of has a bouncing ping pong ball kind of rhythm. I hope this comes across on the speaker here, but that's what they sound like. Beautiful little birds. They live for about 10 years. Their territory is about an acre, acre and a half. They're territorial because there's not a lot of resources in the chaparral, and these critters have to stake out their territory so they can maintain their resources. And that's how you spell it, by the way. Wren tit. It's not rent it. You say that term, most people think you're asking what you're going to rent at the car agency. There's another very territorial bird. This is an island scrub jay. There's several species of scrub jay. This is the special one on the islands. They're beautiful little birds. Well, they're not too little. They're not too quiet either. They have that raucous kind of call. Fascinating birds. Then there's a lot of arthropods. This is the ceanothus silk moth. This little critter here is a spittlebug. It's a very rare picture. Christina Sandoval, who runs the preserve there on Coal Oil Point, this is an adult spittlebug coming out of a larval, or actually the immature form of the spittlebug. Spittlebugs are those little things that are inside those wads of spit on sagebrush you may have seen when you go hiking along the coast. And there's a lot of mammals too. The California grizzly bear, its favorite habitat was the chaparral. It's on the state flag. Last one in Southern California, including Santa Barbara, died in Southern California's Santa Ana Mountains by Temecula in 1908. Unfortunately, the last one was seen in the Sequoias in 1924, so they're all gone now. We don't know what ecosystem impact they had, but it must have been significant. They make these tunnels. Can you imagine being a Native American and gathering berries and going down one of these tunnels and meeting one of these fellows? It wouldn't be pleasant. They had a characteristic hump on their back, and they really dominated the state. They were incredible animals. Unfortunately, they're gone now, though. However, there still are some remnants. There are still jaguars that come up from Mexico and Arizona, but they don't come to California anymore. But there used to be a lot of them here. There's condors in California, again, because they have a place to go, which is the chaparral. It's a wonderful story how they recovered, by the way, something you might want to look into if you don't know about it already. I think there were only like barely 2,000 birds alive, and they brought them back from extinction. There's mountain lions, of course, and some vicious horned lizards. And the island fox actually is an amazing creature that was either trapped on the islands as time went on or floated over there on some kind of debris. And once they were there, they were isolated. So over 10, 20,000 years, they evolved into very specialized species. A wonderful little animal, very friendly, by the way. And there's a lot of plants. I'm going to focus on the chaparral species on the Channel Islands. Santa Rosa Island manzanita. It's a beautiful species, endangered, of course. And then there's the Torrey pine, which we mentioned earlier, a beautiful plant. And there's some chamise. This is on Catalina Island. You don't usually see them this big. This thing's probably on the order of a century or more old. And then one of my favorite plants of all time is the Santa Cruz Island buckwheat. You can actually grow these in your yard. They're one of the prettiest plants that you can find. So there's all sorts of chaparral wonders on the islands and also on the mainland too that are waiting for you to discover them. So I'll pause here for a second for any questions on any of that before we get into a rather contentious topic. Anything out there?
Yes. So Julia asks, what can you tell us about cycles of cultural burning in the chaparral by indigenous people?
Well, let me get to that when I talk about my fire story. That's a great question. Anything
Okay.
related to the animals or the plants at all?
Yeah, why Brian asked, why does manzanita bark peel and in later life turn from red to brown and then stop peeling?
Well, they should peel every year if it's on its normal cycle. What happens is manzanita is an amazing plant. It has zero tolerance for fire. So any kind of fire will immediately fry and destroy the cambium, which is right at the surface, because their bark's basically paper thin, right? So when they grow, they've got to peel off that little layer, and that's what they do. So that's why it peels. The coloration can depend on the sort of situation, but yeah, it's pretty interesting. You can kind of tell the kind of fire pattern and regime in an area by looking at the kinds of bark on plants. Plants with a lot of thin bark, like lodgepole pine, manzanitas, mean they have a naturally high severity fire. Infrequent fire, but when it burns, boy, it's hot. When you get trees with very thick bark, like you get from things like ponderosa pine, those have infrequent fires that are cooler. So that's kind of an interesting thought, kind of unrelated to your question, but kind of related in a way. Anything else?
Yeah. JJ Pfeiffer asks, historically, is chaparral a preferred environment for Homo sapiens?
Well, now that we've turned to agriculture, probably not. It's the environment, the climate is preferred. People love the Mediterranean climate. That's why so many people have come to California. And it's got a lot of habitat and environmental diversity. But chaparral itself, there's only a few of us that really love it. We're trying to change that with webinars like this.
Okay. And Baghdad asks, if chaparral is basically, maybe you want to, it has fire in here. Maybe you want
Okay.
to say. So,
Yeah, let's launch into the fire story. So basically everything most people know about fire is wrong, because everything you hear in the newspaper is catastrophized, and there's a huge vested interest that wants to demonize chaparral and wants to make it the enemy and to blame it for all our problems. So much of what you hear is just not accurate. So let's go through what we know. So first of all, every ecosystem has its own fire regime. And that's pretty simple. And what are those? There's basically two kinds. There's mixed severity and crown fire regimes. Mixed severity is typically what you have in dry ponderosa pine forests, mixed conifer forests like in the Western Sierra, where you'll get a flare up and every tree gets toasted, and then you'll get an understory burn for a while, and then it'll flare up again. Now, this doesn't preclude the fact that you can have a large high severity fire in a forest if the conditions get right. But you often get a mix, which is what you see in most of the forests in the Western United States. The other kind of fire regime is the crown fire regime. And that's when the fire comes through, it's high severity and everything gets taken out. And that's what the chaparral has. Perfectly normal, perfectly natural, high severity fire. And some forests have that too. The lodgepole pine forest in the Rocky Mountains, they don't burn for centuries. And then when they do, boy, they do. And that's the natural system. Now, here comes the conflict. We don't like those kind of high severity big fires. So we've demonized them. And there's a reason, of course, because it burns down people's homes and destroys communities that unfortunately are too close to these systems. So we've concocted all sorts of stories that make it sound like, well, that's not the way it's supposed to be. And we're going to go in there and clear the vegetation, which now has become supposedly unnatural. Plants grow. It's not a surprise. And when fires come, they burn, and depends on the system and how the weather is will determine how it moves through the system itself. But essentially, we're looking at a problem with human perspective. So just keep that in mind for a moment. So the chaparral's relationship to fire. Here's that old grizzly bear tunnel that we have near our house. At least it was here because the 2007 Witch Creek fire took it out. That's my son. He resprouted. Let's go back again so you can see what's going on here. That manzanita there in the lower middle upper right hand corner gets burned, and you can see that too. It's over there on the right a little bit. So most people look at this and say, my gosh, it was a disaster. It's destroyed the ecosystem. The soil's sterilized. It's going to cause a flood. None of that's right. Perfectly normal. Didn't sterilize the soil. And the system will come back marvelously. Chaparral really does survive best by high severity hot fires, because shortly after these fires, you know exactly what's going to happen. It's going to explode with life all over again. However, if there's too many fires, you just eventually you cause the chaparral to disappear. This is a picture in San Diego County. Whole area got burned in 1970. Middle section got burned in 2001 and all the way in the back. Front section got burned again in 2003. Not enough time for the system to recover. So what do you got? You got weeds. A lot of that you'll see on the Central Coast by San Luis Obispo. Those miles and miles, especially around Solvang area, when you drive out there, you get these isolated oaks everywhere in the grasslands. All of that used to be coastal sage scrub with oaks. Now it's been burned so many times and overgrazed, you've got an unnatural, weedy landscape with some oaks that are struggling. And the Indian Native American question was raised earlier. We think probably along the Central Coast, especially Native American fires contributed to the elimination of chaparral in that area. And then when the Spanish got here, and then the Mexicans, of course, followed through with the cattle and increasing fire. And then, of course, we pushed the accelerator to the floor. We've increased fire so much now, the systems are just disappearing throughout the state of California. It's one of the greatest threats we have. So getting back to Native American fire use, they definitely used it. But the thing to remember is Native Americans were like the rest of us. They were all trying to survive and create environments that facilitated their rich lives. So they burned around their villages to facilitate the growth of plants that they needed, also to keep the grizzly bear away. But out in the backcountry, it was pretty much left to its own design by lightning fires, which for chaparral, it's anywhere from 30 to 150 years or more between fires with lightning strikes. And so you get below that, and it leads to some pretty ugly things. Reduced biodiversity, weedy grasslands, which are more flammable than the chaparral. That's called type conversion. You're converting one type of habitat to another, and increased fire risk. This is a picture of Catalina Island. They had a wonderful opportunity to restore that island to some of its previous conditions a century ago. And one of the things they did was, let's put exclosures around, which will keep out the buffalo and the elk and the deer and everything else that's out there. I don't know if there's elk. I do know there's deer. And they could have cordoned off that island to keep all of those animals off. And had they done that, this is what would have happened. This is an exclosure that kept all those animals away, the surrounding environment. The animals were allowed to roam freely. None of them are native to the island. Had they exclosed the island completely and kept the deer off and the buffalo away, the entire island would look like that middle thing again, which was, the natural condition. Unfortunately, this island fire that happened, which is what this story is all about 15 years ago or so, it burned and scarified all the seeds in the seed bank. They had one shot at restoration. Those seeds had probably been in the soil for a century or more. Now they've germinated. They're all nipped to the ground by the deer and the buffalo. And so all you had left were these little islands fenced in. They've taken down some of the fences, and within a week, all those plants are gone. So restoration is an incredibly complex issue, and we have wonderful opportunities, but we got to take them when we can. So it's best to think of chaparral as adapted to a particular fire pattern, not fire per se. There's all sorts of wonderful ways plants and animals have adapted to the environment of fire. Some the plants die and they come back from seedlings. Ceanothus does that. That's the picture there on the left. Some just resprout. Scrub oak does that very well. Catalina cherry does that. Then there's some confused plants that they resprout and they seed, which chemise does there on the right. And then there's a whole bunch of other things. There's fungi and bulbs that come up because of the fire. And the thing you have to remember, though, that they're not adapted to fire. They're adapted to fire like you are because you have fire insurance on your home. Why do you have fire insurance? Well, because you need to be burned out every 30 years? No. You have it so you can survive a fire when it comes, because it may come. These plants have fire insurance. A lot of their seeds need some sort of fire cue, either heat or the chemicals in the charred wood to stimulate their germination, but they're not sitting there waiting to be burned. They just have the adaptation to hang on until the fire does come, which eliminates all the competition, especially the rabbits. I mean, if you're a rabbit and you're going under the chaparral canopy and a little seedling comes up, what are you going to do? You're going to eat the seedling. So what happens after a fire? Well, the bunnies and the rodents are gone for the most part. There's no competition for other plants. There's minerals everywhere now, and there's no competition for the water. What a great time to come up as a plant. Think about that. These plants can stay in the soil, not the plants, but the seeds, for a century or more. And then when the fire comes, like for Ceanothus, it changes the pore on the Ceanothus seed, which allows water to come in, and that little germinating process starts right away. So chaparral doesn't need fire. It's perfectly fine without it, but boy, when it comes, it's ready to come back, just like your home would be rebuilt after a fire. So this is a post-fire environment. You can see what happens. These seeds have been in the soil, these wildflower seeds, for a century or so. Whole sorts of wonderful array. And what happens? Well, about 2 years after the event, you don't see the flowers anymore. Well, what goes on? Well, they did their thing. They put their seeds in the soil, and they're ready for the next fire. They don't need it anytime soon, but they'll be back. Here's a great picture by a colleague of mine, Bryant Baker. This is right above Santa Barbara, I think after the Sita fire, maybe. Isn't that kind of interesting? I think there's about a 3-year timeline. Same place, but you see, the soil there and the plants on the left. People will, be terrified of that. Well, look what happens. This is not a sterilized environment. This is an incredibly rich, biodiverse environment. So I just want to remind you here, and we can go back to some questions, that nature can be used to enhance your life in ways you probably haven't imagined yet. And you got to get outside first and foremost. I don't know if you know this, but most of your doctors and dentists have nature pictures in their offices. The reason is because of a gallbladder doctor's experiment down in, I think it was New Jersey in the 80s. He put his patients on one side of the hospital that faced the park and another half facing the other hospital building. The patients that were facing the park recovered faster, the nurses liked them better, and they asked for less drugs. So after that, everybody started putting nature pictures in their offices to relax you. So it's deep inside. We just have to tap into it. And we have to use all your senses. Smell the chirpings, which are those smells that come off of the sages. See the green, the beautiful patterns in the shrubs. Those patterns relax you because that's what we grew up with, our species-wise, for 3 million years. We're not used to these straight walls. You look at these shrubs, the fractals, the repeating patterns, they make you feel good because you're back home. And then you want to connect. Learn some of the plants. Look at a rock. Find out what it is. Nature will surprise you on a daily, if not hourly basis, if you actually enjoy the moment you're out there and not just this sort of trite present moment kind of orientation. You can't help not enjoy your life and the precious moments you have when you're out there and you let nature in, and it just surprises you on a daily basis. And what you start finding out is when you know things, you find out what you don't know, and you'll see a bird you've never seen before. You would have known that had you not known the birds that should be there. So I just want to add one more thing. You can bring nature to your own house. This is my backyard. It was a lawn. I put a bunch of native plants there. This is the first year after the fact. This is about 3 years later. That's our Chief Spiritual Officer Cooper when he got a little older. And I just want to remind you, this is not fuel, okay? I have to tap into this just for a moment. This is what people like to call native plants and chaparral. It's actually nature, because when you don't like something, like especially ethnic groups or something, you come up with your own rhetorical pejorative term. This is habitat. It provides all sorts of wonderful things, and you can have it near your house just as long as you retrofit your home for fire safety and do it properly. And when you sit out there with your coffee cup, there's a white-crowned sparrow who will be showing up at your houses probably within the next 2 weeks. They come from the Sierra after living up there and breeding for the summer. And all of a sudden, all these wonderful creatures will show up, surprising you at every moment. So nature's an incomparable guide if you know how to follow her. And with that, thank you very much. And it's been an honor to be able to present the secrets of the chaparral to you. So let's go to questions.
Okay, very good. Well, this one was left over right before you started talking about fire. If chaparral is basically the backbone of California's Mediterranean climate landscape, how can we coexist with it since it thrives with fire and we have a sad history with fires destroying property, etc.?
Yeah, well, okay, a couple things that you want to change your description with thrives with fire. The thing is, it's sensitive to fire, and it's got to be the right pattern, like the frequency, the time of year, the intensity. You mess up any of those, and fire will take it out. So that's something that it's a little complicated, but if we understand that, then we can kind of help the rest of the public kind of get the right picture. I don't know what the answer is about development and how to solve the issue. We worked with Cal Fire for 15 years to try to get them to develop a fire risk reduction plan. They pretty much ignored us and the science, even though we did finally get them to acknowledge the threat of too much fire in Chaparral. But we didn't eventually get everything, so we took them to court. We won in the appellate court. So now we're in negotiations with them to try to come up with a way to figure out a way not to stop fires, because that's never going to happen. We just have to get this out of our heads. But what we can do, we can stop disasters in our communities by retrofitting the communities themselves, working from the house out, making the homes fire safe. And one of the key things, the Australians and the Canadians know this, you put exterior sprinklers on your house. Wet homes won't burn. We've got this thing. Well, let's put the sprinklers on the inside. Well, that used to work in urban environments like New York. Fires come from the outside now. So we've got to change our whole way of thinking if we want to protect our community. So hopefully that answers your question.
Okay, and you try to find my cheat sheet, which I just lost because I've got too many windows open. There we go. Yeah, I was tempted to answer this one, but I wanted to get your take on it. Do other Mediterranean climate zones have similar chaparral plant palettes, or is it completely different region to region?
Oh, that's a great question. So blindfold yourself, get on a plane. We're going to take you back to, we're going to do a loop and take you back to California. They drop you in Spain, southern France, central Chile. You can't, you do a double take because it looks like home. South Africa is a little different. The plants are a little stranger. They have these, what are they? They're not Banksia. That's what's in Australia. Proteas. They have proteas there. Australia's got the eucalyptus, but it's got the same kind of structure, right? The same kind of shrubland. So different plant palette, yes, but many of the plants look almost identical to ours, even though they're different species.
Yeah. That's a big topic. It's a great question, as you said. Lot we could spend a whole webinar on that topic alone.
Speaking of eucalyptus, I do want to mention something. it's got a pretty bad rap, and it deserves it when it takes over riparian areas and modifies habitat, because we don't have a lot of animals that exploit it. However, monarchs are important nesters in the eucalyptus groves. They've taken over the trees that we've cut down. Apparently, we don't really know, but they do serve a function. However, eucalyptus, like all trees, they actually can protect communities from wildfire if they're properly trimmed and irrigated. The problem is the litter from some of these plants. All right, so if you keep the litter under control, you're okay. So eucalyptus don't explode into fireballs. I've been in a lot of fires. I was a firefighter for a little bit, and for example, the 2003 Cedar Fire raced through Scripps Ranch, which is filled with eucalyptus. What usually happens, it's not the trees that ignite the houses, it's the other way around. This is counterintuitive, but it's something that people need to consider. Trees, if they're properly trimmed and irrigated, actually protect your home from the #1 cause of home ignition, and that's embers. So anyway, I hope that's sort of the end of that, because this human interaction with fire is so, it's a whole different story, and nature is so much more rewarding. So hopefully we can move on from our own particular perspectives on fire.
I like Morgan's question here. How do you personally think we can live a healthy human life in today's swiping, flashing, beeping, clicking, LED lit world?
I've got a great, I'm starting an organization. We don't allow members to join, but you have to sign this document, which you promptly have to tear up because you're not supposed to be in this organization. It's the Antediluvian Organization. And let me give you some of the clues. Here's the story. You have a choice to not do what you're saying. You really do. After the election, I mean, these are personal choices, right? I stopped watching the news. The news is not the news anymore. Walter Cronkite has long since gone. It's designed to tap into your cortisol levels and keep you on stress load. It's not helpful. My wife's been saying, why are you smiling so much more? I'm not watching the news anymore. My phone, don't take it up to the bedroom. Turn off your notifications. And it goes on beyond that. Write a card or a letter to somebody once a month. Instead of picking up the phone, when you're picking up the phone, right? You're doing this. To text, call them or write them a letter. Another thing is, if you're bored, don't pick up your phone, pick up a book. A real book, not your Kindle, a book. And also the news thing, I hear this, I only watch a little bit. It's like alcoholism. You can't just take one drink. What's another one? Oh, get a watch. I teach this natural history class, right? And nobody's allowed to bring their phone into the classroom. But I time these activities. So I have my phone and I sneak out of the classroom looking at it for the timer. I'm thinking, my gosh, what am I doing? So I went and found the watch my parents gave me in high school. And now I look at my watch. And what's the deal? Because you have that text notification on that thing when you check your time. That's what sucks you in. How about getting off of all social media? All of it. They don't care about you. They want to show off their new shoes. Just understand that. I know people like to keep connected. Pick up the phone, have a party. Let's see. Set yourself up for random learning experiences. I was trying to figure out what antediluvian meant. I didn't know. What's the first thing you're gonna do? Oh, well, how many times have you been with a friend and you talk about something and they say, oh, just a minute. And they look it up on their phone. And then they get sucked into the text. Look in a dictionary. You know what happened? I did this last month. I learned how to spell again with phonics. And then I saw these weird pictures of animals I'd never known before. Random events of learning. So these are things we've sort of come up with. Ditch AI. That first thing that comes up when you put something in Google, it's AI. It's like making love to a plastic doll. Go find a real website produced by real people and find out what they think. Right? So these are all things you have to decide. And I will tell you, look at that. There's those moths that get in your pantry. Nature just surprised me. Unfortunately, his demise is not so pleasant for him. But anyway, just it's amazing when you start doing this. So I hope I didn't go too much on a tirade, but this is so important. What did most of you do if you're over 40 or 50? What'd you do when you were a kid? Mom, I'm bored. Go outdoors.
Great, Rick. I want to end at 6:30, so I have a couple more questions though. Baghdad asks, what indicators should be prioritized to monitor chaparral health across California, given its vast extent and ecological variability?
Yeah, that's a great question. You know, the only risk chaparral is really facing, excluding development, right? And clearance operations of questionable value, is too much fire. So if you got a stand of chaparral, it's 110 years old, protect it. Keep fire out of there, reduce ignitions, enjoy the age. There's in some of those old growth stands, especially up north, and you can see those. Actually, I showed you one at Burton Mesa Preserve. They've got trunks as big as your waist. And the fascinating thing is, after 50 or 60 years old, there's things like lichens and little organisms that exist in chaparral that can't exist anywhere else. In fact, there's a lot of plants that need at least 30 years of litter before they'll even think about having seeds germinate. So every cycle of the chaparral system is pretty remarkable. The thing that you are worried about is high fire frequency, and then recovered chaparral, sometimes that has recovered and there's weeds underneath. That's a real tough one. That means invasive weed control. So that's a whole different story. But basically, the older, the most intact, pristine chaparral, the better. The health issue is on the lower end, the immaturity risk. That's the thing we have to look out for.
Will coastal sage, anonymous asks, will coastal sage scrub eventually become chaparral if left on its own?
Oh, that's a great question. Well, coastal sage scrub is a whole different system. Some people like to call it soft chaparral. I kind of, it's got a whole different host of plants, and there's a lot of coastal sage scrubs. You know, when you take that road up the 101, and just before you turn into the tunnel area to go into Solvang, whatever. No, yes, there's all this coastal sage scrub along the hill. It's beautiful. Even stuff that's been revegetated, I think, by nature, maybe Caltrans did, I don't know. It's beautiful. No, so coastal sage scrub is coastal sage scrub. The only thing it'll turn to is a grassland because of too much fire or grazing, which you see in the valley out there on the way to San Luis Obispo.
Okay, I'm going to make this our last question. Sorry, folks, we could probably talk for ever tonight. Rick is so interesting, but I have an appointment and I have to actually.
Oh,
cut it short.
no.
So, I know. But JJ asks, do you ever offer guided nature tours?
You know, I did one up there with folks at the Botanical Garden once, and I get up there once in a while. We actually had somebody from Santa Barbara drive down every weekend for 8 weekends for our naturalist class in Escondido. That's probably quite the stretch, but but you know, if you go to our website and sign up for notifications, yeah, I do publicize that from time to time, and if I do come up, I do try to let everybody know so they can sign up. So yeah, send us an email and we'll keep you informed.
Yeah, perhaps we can do it with CIR sometime.
Yeah, let's do it. Let's do a trip and see the Coreopsis.
Oh, I was thinking on the mainland, Chaparral.
Oh, okay. Well, that's good too.
Maybe at the Santa Monica Mountains.
Yeah, that'd be beautiful. I'd love that.
Great. Well, thank you very much, Rick, for such a wonderful presentation. Lots of people are putting in the Q&A how much they enjoyed it tonight,
great.
how insightful it is, and how much they learned. And we really appreciate it. And thank you all for attending. And remember, you can see the webinar again in a few days when it's posted on our website in the webinar section. That information is in the chat. So thank you, everyone. Have a good evening and see you next time.
Thank you so much.